Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Talking Numbers. It is my Talking Numbers Mastering Profit series. It's our second series of our Mastering Profit series, and it's brought to you by Profitmaster Global Outsourcing. Welcome to episode 4 in this 6-part series. If you've missed my name in the past, it's Paul Jansz, and I'm here with Richard Croaker. We're going to go through some key things that we're going to follow up from our first 3 episodes that we've started with. We hope you've enjoyed it. If you've missed it, make sure you go back and have a look at episodes 1 to 3, as well as our series 1 of Mastering Profit as well, which is fantastic. Now, in this 6-part series, as we continue to talk, we're going to talk about people and how you can start to look at your people model a little bit differently. We're going to be entering a new financial year soon, and you've got the ability to look at this and use this content to say, how can I get my people model differently? How can I start to bring greater profit into my business model? Now, I'm back here with the very experienced and founder and CEO of Profitmaster Global Outsourcing, Richard Croaker. How are you? Welcome back.
Hey, hi. It seems not very long ago that we were talking, and I was in the Philippines, and then we did another episode. I was back in Australia, and now I'm back in the Philippines. So I'm clocking up a few frequent flyer miles at the moment. How are you?
Yeah, really good, mate. It's always good to be back here and talk to you about some really key things. And then we've got 3 key topics to roll through. But one of the things I'd like you to share with our audience is, before we get into this, now I know you've been a successful business person yourself. I know you're a CA. Many of our listeners may not know how you got into the accounting industry and how now you're running Profitmaster Global Outsourcing, but are you okay to quickly share your journey? I know you're a partner very young.
Yeah, sure. My university education was a product of the 70s. I haven't got much hair, but when you get to see it, it's a bit grey. I finished university in the late 70s. I think it was 1980 thereabouts, and it came through the typical graduate thing that everyone out of the universities tend to go through and look for opportunities in what was the big 8 at the time, and then became the big 6 and the big 4. I went into an audit firm in Sydney. Was one of the big 8 at the time, and did my professional year there. Came out of the audit division. I got to the senior supervisor level. And then went out to our family practice in Bathurst, which still exists, by the way, and moved out there with my father. Became a partner in that firm quite early in my career, and then we set up a practice in Canberra, and we ran that. And eventually, I moved for family reasons up to Queensland, and that was the big move of my life. We moved up, my wife and I moved up, and the kids, and took on a new life up there, which was just, we're now well and truly Queenslanders. That's about 30 years ago we moved to Queensland. But from there, I had an accounting practice in the suburb of Manly in Queensland, which for listeners who are familiar with that area, it's on the Bayside. So it's a bit like Manly in Sydney, but it's in Brisbane. And then I was really building and selling practices for a little while. I was very successful in building practices. In fact, some of the people who bought those practices, I'm very proud to say, are still my friends. And I think you may have met some of them, Paul. But then later in the mid-teens, sort of 2014 or so, I had the opportunity to come over to the Philippines here, and I was mainly looking for research support for the marketing section in the accounting firm that I had at the time. And in the course of my visit here, I managed to meet some local lawyers and accountants, and they introduced me to the idea of a bigger business of outsourcing. And we started with it was a small shed. In fact, we had what we would say is a shed in Australia. We call it a stall over here. We had about 12 staff working in there. They were basically a call centre and internet research people, and then these old business partners of mine and other accountant colleagues of mine said, well, you know, why don't we do some accounting work? And so we started to diversify the business over here a little bit. And you and I had a chat just before here. I was telling you about how we really morphed into the business that we are now in the period during COVID. During that period, you know, the work from home model started to take shape. Hybrid working started to take shape. The remote access resources started to take shape in a big way. And I think there was a point there where it was really clear that there was going to be a talent shortage of professional people leading out of COVID and into the time period that we're in now. So our management over here, along with our board, we made some decisions that we'd concentrate on professional service firms and financial service firms. And that's what we are now. So very much am I an accountant, and you know, I understand the needs of the guys that we work with, but also I run the business here as well. I mean, at the moment, I mean, we're predominantly an accounting practice, I guess. I'm sorry, I'm looking out there because I'm looking out to the office to see who's there. But predominantly accounting practice, but we also have people in finance broking. They use us. And also in financial planning. Those are the three big areas for us. We have others as well, but it's principally a financial and professional services staff firm now.
Brilliant. And look, the key to me asking that is, while we're running this series, and we ran series 1 with some fantastic topics, and series 2, again, fantastic topics in this 6-part series, it's what I wanted to try and share with everybody listening to this is the experience that comes with that. Okay, so it's not just a matter of, this is a learning experience. This is about education. This is about how we get better in running our firms, our businesses, how we create value, how we sell. At the end of the day, Stephen Covey used to talk about beginning with the end in mind. You know, when you go into a business, you want to realize the value and you want to sell that one day. And you've just mentioned that you've done that 3 or 4 times, maybe 5 times. You know, that's what you want to do. That's the entrepreneurial mindset that we talk about a lot. And I think that's what this series is about, to make sure that we can provide you with some tips, some better ways to do things, some new things to try. And that's what I want to continue in this next series, this series 2, as we get into episode 4. So let's get into that. So we finished episode 3 talking about why communication is important in management. Now I want to get into, this is a bit of a toxic area that I want to sort of just touch on. And it's 3 ways to prevent victim blaming from happening in your workplace. So look, this is I suppose the challenge that all of us face, whether we're managers, whether we're leaders. There's areas there that we can go into, which then brings in, call it culture compatibility. If people are unhappy in their workplace, if people feel like they're being victim blamed, we won't retain them. We know you spoke about it being an employee-led market right now. And the fact is, there is a massive shortage of people and good people out there. So when we get them, we want to retain them, because I'm not quite sure if anyone's done the table of what it costs you if you lose a good employee as well, you know, and it is quite high. So again, we want to make sure we build a great culture. So we want to make sure that these sort of victim blaming, how do we prevent it? What are some of the solutions? You know, the things that, you know, the lines we often hear, and I was on a talk back probably a couple of months ago, oh, he had it coming. Oh, she was asking for it. All these sorts of key things that's not the type of culture that most of us, 1, would like to be involved in, and 2, would like to lead. So let's maybe take it a step back, Rich, and are you okay to explain the definition of victim blaming for me?
Yeah, you mentioned the word toxic, and you know, when you're working with people, and as I am, we've got some 80 people here, and there will be accounting firms who are similar size, but it doesn't matter about the size. If something like victimizing and then victim blaming inserts itself into your culture, it is toxic. And how you deal with that, it's just so important. It's really easy to say, well, I'll just kick the person out the door or kick people out the door. And maybe that's the outcome that you have to have. But there is still an issue in your culture that needs to be repaired if it's already existing there. So, and I've seen this happen in practices over the years, and with clients as well. It's not just limited to accounting practice, it happens with clients, of course. But I mean, obviously victimization is one thing, and it's fairly easily understandable that a person or a group of people pick on an individual or a group of individuals for one particular reason, and it affects the way in which the person being victimized feels about themselves, and then has other aspects, impacts on other aspects of their work life, and then impacts on their personal life. And sometimes that can be very, very serious, very serious. And by the way, that victimization also has an impact on the person who's doing the victimizing as well. There's a sense of power and things like that. Victim blaming is a different thing. So it's part of the victimization, but it's the situation that arises when somebody who is the person doing the victimizing, so that the person with the power over the person being victimized, it's when they actually then blame the victim for the thing that occurred in the first place. All right. So you end up with a situation where the victim is not only being bullied or harassed or whatever the situation is, but they're also being blamed for it themselves. Yeah. And that can happen it might be gender related, it might be sexism related, it could be experience related, it could be any range of things. But it's victim blaming is the occurrence by the person who's doing the victimizing actually blaming the victim.
Yeah.
And yes, as I say, it's extremely toxic.
Yeah, and there's another aspect to that as well, that I know that I had a guest on one of my live shows, my masterclasses last year, and we spoke about gaslighting. It really isn't too different to that, is it? In terms of, you telling the person one thing and then you saying, oh, no, I didn't tell you that, when they go and you give them a directive, let's call it, to go and do something. And you say, oh, no, I didn't do that. And then it's like, is it any different? It brings in a toxic culture, doesn't it?
Well, both of them are toxic. I think dealing with a situation where a direction is given and then argued about whether it was given or how it was given or where it was given. I mean, those sorts of things can occur in culture anyway, in work culture anyway. Yeah. But it can still be toxic. Don't get me wrong. I think we're talking about something more serious here. This is when it gets to the personality of the person being victimized, and how you deal with that. So that firstly, it's got to be removed from your work culture and repaired with the individual or group somehow. But then it's got to be assured that it's not going to happen again.
True. Because other people can actually see that, and that's a thing. Sometimes it can be so damaging to the business. So let's get into that for a second in terms of people listening to this. What's your thought processes on how to avoid it or prevent it in the workplace to create that better or greater culture, as you mentioned before?
Look, I'll give you the experience of how I do it here. And I guess that comes out of many years of experience working with people. Interestingly, since being here and working with a large group of people, I've learned a lot about staff and a lot about human resources. I'm certainly not a human resources person, but I've learned a lot about how they think and how they work and how they implement the things that we are able to use to make the business work at that human resources level. I think possibly it starts with the selection of your staff in the first place. So one of the things that we do here is not only do we have skills tests and everything for our staff coming in, but we have tests around culture and personality as well. And I think small practices tend not to really get involved in that. They will tend to have an interview with a staff member and work with a gut feel. Oh yeah, that feels good. It feels good that that person is coming in and I can get them in and work with my team. Nothing wrong with that. But I think that making sure that you taking a step further and getting some study around the personality of the individual to make an objective and assessment about them is not a bad idea. So that sorting it out from the start is a good way to sorting out your staff from the start is a good way to work through it. The other thing is to have a defined culture that people know what they're getting into when they arrive in the business. So within our business, we have a culture based on 4 pillars, and they are loyalty, integrity, capability, and attitude. And we explain that to the staff right from the start. And we look in the first time, in the first little while that they're engaged with us, we look to see how they're meeting their cultural, meeting the cultural considerations and expectations that we have with them. And then so that's the second thing, is outlining your culture and your expectations around culture right from the start. Doesn't matter. I mean, we find that we have made mistakes in our staff. So sometimes we will select a staff member. We think that they're even having done a personality test, and then we find out soon that they actually don't fit our culture. Well, that's the chance in those very early stages to actually move them on. So then the next part of it, I think, is implementing specific policies around victimizing and victim blaming, whether it's bullying, whether it's sexism or racism or those sorts of things, making very clear what your expectations within the culture of your workplace are. And we do that within our employee manual, and every staff member has access to that employee manual, and those policies are written down and enforced. And that's a very important part of it as well, that people understand that they have to be enforced. And then it's an education thing, reinforcement through education, but most importantly, fostering that sense of respect within the business. And I actually think, when I talked about those 4 pillars, one of those pillars could have easily been respect for each other, and demonstrated respect from the leaders within the business to the others in the business.
Yep. And there's probably 2 key things that I'd like to wrap up with here in this particular one, because I think what you've outlined there is outstanding. So the great thing about this is people can rewind and go back as well. So go back and rewind this as well. But I just made a couple of notes, and that was around your selection process and some testing. And I would agree with you, given my coaching background in the accounting industry as well, for as long as I've been in this 25 years or so, that was one thing that we used to always put in place with our firms, is a better selection process. So yep, like you said, it's great to have that gut feeling. They tick all the boxes in terms of their technical knowledge, which is what you're employing them for, but how do they fit in the team culturally? And nowadays there's some fantastic things that you can do, some call it further testing that you can do. And that's what you spoke about. So I definitely encourage everyone to do that. I love your thought process on the defined culture, the 4 pillars. So it does fit into that. The question I've got for you though is, Rich, how do you then measure that? So it's great to have the 4 pillars, and I'd encourage every firm to do this as a part of their defined culture moving forward. So you're selecting the right people and people are adhering to the 4 pillars. How do you measure that internally?
Can I address 2 things there? One is how you address that, so how you measure it. That's one thing, and then I think the other thing is how you address victim blaming or victimization when it occurs. So I think there's 2 things there. The way we measure it is that we have a very defined review process. That keeping in mind that what we're doing here is that our staff actually work for the company Profitmaster Global Outsourcing, but the actual work that they're doing is for an accounting firm or a financial planning firm or something like that in Australia. So in the sense that they work for us, we have quarterly reviews and appraisals. In fact, in the early stages, they're more regular than that. We have quarterly reviews and appraisals. And the people who are existing in that are our operations manager and our HR manager have participation in that. And then also the client has participation in that. And then there is an empirical measurement. So a series of questions that they are asked out of 10, report on that. So unlike, and I'm probably old school on this, and I'm aware of some Harvard research around the suitability of having performance reviews in the first place, but we still use them. There's a point system, and it's, they know what the questions are, they have participation in it, but at the conclusion of that discussion is also a discussion around, well, you know, how do you feel? You know, how are you getting on with your colleagues? And what we're really doing there is identifying things, issues that might be of concern, because sometimes this victimization and victim blaming is very much under the table and very secretive, and you know, people don't want to talk about it. So being able to get it onto the table is a very important aspect. And then, so firstly, you've identified it, and then how you deal with it. The way we deal with it is we have a disciplinary policy within the company. It's defined, and there are steps that we go through. Each person has a chance to be able to separately put their point of view, and then our HR management are able to make some decisions around that. And sometimes it can just be counselling for the people involved, but sometimes it has to be more serious than that. And you know, I have people here that are able to make the decisions on how they deal with that. I can say honestly that within the business we have had one particular case of victim blaming, of victimisation and victim blaming. It was the same case. We operated our HR disciplinary procedure. Fortunately, the person who was being victimised was able to feel the ability to speak confidentially with our HR manager and open up about what was actually occurring. And having identified it, we were then able to speak with it was actually a group of individuals that were involved in the victimising. We actually tried to deal with it through counselling. I can't remember how many people were involved, but some of those people who were involved left the company, and then one of them actually stayed, and they became quite good friends, believe it or not. So I think it's, you know, recognising it, finding a way to talk about it, and then having a very defined process to deal with it.
Yeah, well said, well said. And I think while I believe that, and definitely to everyone listening to this, this is probably where, if you think about your review-based system, one of the great things that I would encourage you to do, and I've encouraged a lot of different firms over the years, is reviewing. It's always looking in the rear vision mirror, but how can you look forward as well? So if you've got, let's say, for example, what Richard just explained there in terms of the 4 pillars, in terms of the defined culture, 4 pillars, you can actually ask someone, how would you like to display those 4 pillars for the next 90 days? So get it into your team member psyche that how would you like to display that? And you don't have to give me an answer right now. Maybe come back to me in 48 hours and maybe come back to us and say, how would you like to display pillar 1, 2, 3, 4? And I think what you do is you then empower them to be aware of, 1, what the pillars are, and 2, how they're going to display that. And it's almost like that self-analysis. You're not telling someone, they're telling you how they are going to display their behaviors. So there's just a little tip as well that I used to use quite a lot when I was with a lot of different firms, because then you sort of, you turn it, you know, instead of telling, it's a bit like anything with kids. I've got 3 young boys. So instead of telling them not what to do, you empower them of what they need to do through their own process. And it's a very different thought process that people can then go through reflect on, and then come back to with, here's a bit of a plan of how I'd like to display my behaviors, which is the cultural behaviors of the business. So there's a great little tip. Well, Rich, thank you. What a great topic to commence. Again, episode 4 of our 6-part series, which is fantastic. Again, it's always great to be able to share, again, the experiences that you've had and share that with everyone watching. So to everyone watching, we hope you've enjoyed this, again, episode 4 of our 6-part series of Mastering Profit. And we look forward to seeing you in episode 5. Thanks, and see you soon, Rich.
See you, Paul. Take care.
Join us at Profitmaster. Passionate people, passionate careers.